so much blindness in this gospel passage. The story begins with physical blindness. As he walked along, Jesus saw a man blind from birth. And the story ends with spiritual blindness. Surely we are not blind, are we? Jesus said, if you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains. So much blindness. Playing on that physical blindness and how our thinking is a way that we see. You probably have said that yourself. When someone says something to you and it becomes clear to you, you say, now I see. There is a podcast by Brian McLaren. He's a Christian preacher, a brilliant teacher. The podcast is called Learning to See. And in that podcast, he reveals a number of reasons why we do not see in that thought kind of way. He talks of them as biases, that we have a real tendency as human beings to have certain biases that prevent us from seeing clearly, prevent us from seeing what is real, what is true. One of the biases he talks about is a contact bias. If you lack contact with someone, you won't see what they see. And I have to admit, with respect to this reading, there are some contact biases that I don't have, and so I will not see clearly everything that is written. I don't know anyone who was born blind and came to sight. And so I cannot see clearly what it is that's going on in their mind and in their heart, in their soul. But I can try and look at things from their perspective. And I have a contact bias in that I don't know what it was like to live in the first century in that part of the world with all those various interactions, those various people and places and lifestyles. And that's why it's important for us to be aware of the kind of biases that we might have so that we can start to see a little more clearly from various perspectives, searching for what is real, what is true. The disciples show us examples of some of the biases. They asked Jesus, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Of course, Jesus answers, neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed to him. The disciples were trying to confirm a bias that they had because they had been taught that bad things happen to bad people. And what could be worse than being born blind? A constant outcast in society, one who had to beg, one who was utterly dependent on others. And in their trying to make sense of it, they leaned on that what they had been taught by the rabbis. So too, the people who, after the man was given his sight, they couldn't even recognize him for who he was. You see, there's a confirmation bias. The human brain, all of our brains, welcome information that confirms what we already believe, what we already think. And we resist information that disturbs or contradicts what we already think. So those were contradictions for the disciples, for those who knew the man before. It just doesn't make sense to our minds, and we can't see a different reality. Jesus says, we must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. The disciples are shown that just seeing this man born blind called Jesus to action. It was time for Jesus to work. But human beings are subject to a bias for comfort, for complacency, for convenience. Our brains welcome data that allow us to relax and be happy. And we have a bias to reject data that require us to adjust or inconvenience ourselves or do something. That's a natural bias that we need to watch out for. The Pharisees are blinded to God's hand in the healing because it happened on the Sabbath day. And they're blinded by their own understanding and following Moses. Yet another bias. I'm sorry, there are actually 13. I'm not going to cover all of them today. That McLaren mentions 13. We'll do a few. The confidence bias. We mistake confidence for competence. We're all vulnerable to the lies of confident people. In fact, our brains prefer a confident lie to a hesitant truth. So the Pharisees, they stuck to their guns. They had to hold on to that confidence, a confidence that was passed on to them from the generations before them. All of them leaning on Moses and that stream of rabbinic thought through the years. They knew if they loosened their guard, let down their guard, if they showed a crack of vulnerability, that the people would start to lose confidence in them and start not paying so much attention to them. There's probably another bias that the Pharisees were subjected to, that anyone who stands in this pulpit and is paid to do it needs to be aware of, a cash bias. It's really hard for us to see anything that interferes with our way of making a living. Our brains are wired to see within a framework of our economy and to see what helps us to make or to keep our money. There's evidence for that. The parents, they too show a bias. They say, we do not know how it is that he now sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he's of age, he'll speak for himself. They said that because they were afraid of the Jews. For the Jews had already said, anyone who follows Jesus or says he's the Messiah, you're out of the synagogue. And that is a huge disruption to the life of anyone in the first century. They cannot admit to seeing because of the implications it'll have on their lives. There's a community bias. It's very hard for us to see something your group doesn't want you to see. Remember the emperor who wore no clothes? Did everyone see that he was naked, but were afraid to say anything? Seeing what is real and what is true can be really scary. It takes effort. And you've heard from the biases that these are kind of built in. There's something we have to make ourselves aware to, and it's risky business. But there is so much opportunity for sight in this passage. We need not fear knowing these biases because there is a way around them. Knowing that they exist is important, of course. But we can overcome. Jesus says, I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see. Jesus came to help us to see what is true, what is real. Jesus says, I am the light of the world. What is the biggest obstacle to seeing? Darkness. And Jesus says, I'm bringing light so that you can see. And Jesus offers a new creation. He took dirt and spat on it and put it on this man's eyes. He worked with creation and poured his divinity on it through the spit. That's what St. Augustine, that's how he reads that. He rubbed it on the man's eyes. And when the man did what might have seemed foolish and went to the place where Jesus said to clean up, the pool of Siloam, he was obedient to Jesus. He could see. It changed the man. His eyes were opened. The change was so much that he took the risk of saying, Jesus is a prophet. He grows in his sight from that physical change. He is transformed into a disciple. He goes from saying, I don't know where he is, to seeing Jesus and saying he's a prophet. When Jesus says to him, do you believe in the Son of Man? He says, and who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him. Jesus said to him, you have seen him, and the one who's speaking with you is he. And the man born blind becomes a disciple. And he worshiped Jesus. He saw in Jesus his divinity. You worship God alone. Now, in full disclosure, I think Jesus maybe took advantage of one bias that I hadn't mentioned, a complementary bias. If people are nice to you, you'll be open to what they see and have to say. Jesus invites us to see. Jesus embraces us in the realities of our lives. In fact, the next thing we see in the Gospel of John is Jesus referring to himself as the Good Shepherd, the one who can guide, the one who can show us the right paths, the one who can lead us to still places in our life, the one who can lead us on paths of righteousness, on paths of justice. This passage is so full of blindness, and it points to places where we ourselves might be blind, but it is so full of hope. It is so full of possibility of transformation through Jesus. Might it be our prayer that Jesus would open our eyes, that we might see him more clearly and follow him more nearly, day by day. I threw in a lyric from Godspell. I didn't even know that was going to come. The Good Shepherd will show us the way. If we, like the man born blind, take that risk of believing in him. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost.